Jed Mathers wasn't the kind of man to go looking for trouble. He kept to his fence lines, mended his own gear, and spoke only when it mattered. But one dry morning near the edge of his pasture, he found a boy, dusty, scared, clutching an old satchel and a copy of a deed with no one left to fight for him. The boy said his pa had died sudden, said a judge was trying to take his land. Most folks would have turned away, but not Jed. Out here in the frontier, justice don't always ride a white horse, and lawmen ain't always on the side of right. With crooked hands pulling at legal threads and a will that's suddenly gone missing, Jed has to decide whether to ride off or stand tall for a boy who just might be family in all the ways that count. What happens when a cowboy faces off against a corrupt judge with nothing but quiet grit and a steady heart? Stick around. This ain't just a story about land or papers. It's about legacy and the kind of fathers you choose. If you believe showing up makes a man a father, saddle up and subscribe. The sky over Dry Creek Valley was pale and stretched tight, like someone had scraped the color out of it and left nothing but heat. Jed Mathers rode slow along the south ridge of his pasture, reins slack in one hand, the other resting on the saddle horn. He wasn't looking for anything, just checking fence line, like he did most mornings. But this morning, something was off. Down near the eastern property marker, just past the mesquite where the creek once ran strong, Jed spotted movement. Not a coyote, too still. Not a deer, too small. He nudged his horse forward, boots brushing the dry earth. It was a boy. Crouched low in the dust, one knee scabbed and bleeding, arms wrapped around a worn canvas satchel like it was the last thing on earth that mattered. Jed dismounted slow, boots crunching gravel. "You all right, son?" The boy didn't flinch, didn't speak either, just stared, wide-eyed. Jed crouched. "Name's Jed. I got water if you need some." The boy's lips moved, barely. "Tommy." Jed unslung his canteen, handed it over. Tommy drank like he hadn't seen water in a day and a half. When he stopped, his hands were still trembling. "Where's your folks?" Tommy's eyes dropped. "Pa's gone." Jed felt that hit like a stone in the gut. "Gone as in..." "Buried him myself," the boy whispered. 2 days ago." Jed sat back on his heels. "How old are you, Tommy?" 10, maybe 11. Ain't rightly sure." "What are you doing out here?" Tommy opened the satchel, pulling out a folded paper, yellowed and soft. "Pa said this was our land, showed me this, said it'd keep us safe." Jed took the paper carefully. It was a faded copy of a deed, barely legible. The name matched what the boy said. Jed had seen the homestead once, a mile east. Rundown cabin, couple outbuildings, mostly scrub and dust now. "You been there since your pa passed?" Tommy nodded. "Till they came." "Who?" "A man in black robes. Said I had no right. Told me to leave or they'd come back with law." Jed's jaw tightened. "Black robes?" Tommy swallowed. Called himself Judge Canfield. Jed stood slowly, folding the paper back into the satchel. "Well, Tommy, you best come on with me for now. I ain't got much, but I got a roof and supper." The boy followed without question. That evening, as the sun settled behind the hills, painting the dust orange and gold, Jed fixed 2 plates of beans and cornbread. Tommy ate quiet but steady. "You got anyone else?" Jed asked gently. "Any kin?" The boy shook his head. "Then we'll sort this out," Jed said. "But first thing's making sure you sleep indoors tonight." Later, as Jed stepped out to check the barn, he noticed something on the ridge beyond the pasture. 2 men on horseback. One of them, broad-shouldered, draped in a dark coat, carried a ledger under one arm. Surveyors. They were moving slow, marking stakes, and Judge Canfield rode right beside them. Jed's eyes narrowed. He knew the signs: land claims, reevaluations, the kind of paperwork used to push people off dirt they'd sweated over. Back in the house, Tommy lay curled on the cot, satchel still gripped tight. Jed watched him for a long moment. He wasn't sure yet what the boy meant to him, But he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let that child get swallowed by dust and paper while he still drew breath. Tomorrow, he'd ride into town and start asking questions. By dawn, Jed had already saddled his horse and poured oats for the boy. Tommy sat on the porch step, chewing slow, eyes heavy but clearer than they'd been the night before. "You said that judge came by your place," Jed said, crouching to double-check his boot strap. "You remember exactly what he said?" Tommy nodded. "Said the land was in dispute now, 'cause I ain't got no guardian. He had men with him. They walked around like they already owned it." Jed's jaw tightened. "Did he show you any papers?" "No, sir. Just said it wasn't mine no more." Jed gave a small nod. "All right. I'm heading into town. You stay close here. Don't answer the door. Don't go far. If trouble rides in, you get down in the root cellar till I'm back." Tommy's eyes searched his face. "You think he'll come back?" Jed stood. He already started something. Men like him don't walk away till they finish it. The town of Cold Rock had 2 churches, 1 saloon, and a courthouse that leaned to the east like it had something to confess. Jed hitched his horse outside the land office and stepped inside. The clerk behind the desk, Elijah Reams, looked up with mild interest. "Morning, Jed. What brings you in?" "I'm looking for records on a land claim. Property east of my pasture. Was owned by a man named Tyler Jennings." Reams flipped open a book and slid a thin pair of spectacles up his nose. Jennings. Got a probate file started last week. Says property's under review due to lack of surviving heirs." Jed leaned forward. "What about a will?" "None filed here." Jed frowned. "That boy says his pa had one." Reams shrugged. "Unless it's been officially recorded, the court treats it like it don't exist." Jed stepped back. "Who filed the probate?" Reams looked at the logbook again. "Judge Canfield himself, 4 days ago, before the man was even in the ground, if the date's right." Outside, Jed took a long breath, dust catching in the crease of his brow. He needed someone who might know more, someone who remembered things not written in ledgers. Doc Amos. Amos had been a prospector, land surveyor, sometime preacher, and sometime drunk, but he'd seen more honest deals and dirty tricks in his time than half the county courthouse. Jed found him in the back of a feed store, hunched over a barrel of nails and talking to himself. "Doc," Jed said, tipping his hat. Amos squinted up. "Well, I'll be. Jed Mathers. Thought you died or married. Same thing, really." Jed cracked a faint smile. "Need your memory more than your humor today." "Then sit down and buy me coffee." They sat out back beneath a shade tarp, and Jed explained everything. Tommy, the deed, the judge, the talk of a missing will. Amos rubbed his beard. "Tyler Jennings. Yeah, I recall he came to me, maybe 2 years back. Said he feared someone might come after the land if anything happened to him. Asked me and Silas Trent to witness his will. It was a good one, too, tight language. Said his boy'd be sole heir. Said he'd leave the signed original somewhere safe if he had to run." "Run from what?" "Had a bad scrape with the Raleigh brothers, land feud, thought he was being followed." "Any idea where he might have hid that will?" Amos tapped his chin. "There's a shack, old mine structure out past Widow's Creek. Tyler used it sometimes when he needed to lay low. Said it had a stove no fire could touch, some government surplus thing." Jed stood. "That'll do." As he turned to leave, Amos called after him. "If it's where I think it is, be careful. That land ain't as forgotten as it looks." Back at the ranch, Tommy was mending the chicken coop with a quiet focus that looked older than his years. Jed dropped a hand on his shoulder. "Get your boots on, son. We're going to find that will." Tommy looked up. "You think it's real?" Jed nodded. "I think your pa tried to do right, and now it's our turn." The shack out past Widow's Creek hadn't seen life in years. A tumble of pine boards and rusted tin, it leaned like it had been tired a long while. Jed and Tommy reached it by late afternoon, the sun hanging low and hot behind them. "Stay close," Jed said, stepping over the busted doorframe. "Watch your footing." Inside, the air was musty with old ash and mule sweat. An iron stove squatted in the corner, blackened from age but still solid. Tommy pointed. That's where Pa used to keep his extra supplies. Said it couldn't burn even if lightning struck. Jed nodded. Fireproof, government made. Army used them in field kitchens. They pried open the door. Inside was nothing but soot, at first. Then Jed's fingers struck something soft yet firm, wrapped in oilcloth and warm from the day's heat. He pulled it free. Inside the pouch, a folded paper packet, sealed with wax and an old copper button, and a second item, an envelope marked, "In case anything happens, give to Silas or Doc." Jed broke the seal with care. The will was there, signed by Tyler Jennings. 2 witnesses named, Doc Amos and Silas Trent. The paper was yellowed but clear, ink faded but legible. Jed held it to the light. There was no mistaking it. Tommy stood frozen. That's it? Ain't it? Jed looked at him. That's the paper they didn't want us to find. He tucked it carefully into his satchel. Let's ride. Back in town, Jed stopped by the small clapboard schoolhouse where Nora Willis taught reading and letters to a dozen kids from nearby homesteads. Nora wasn't just a school teacher. She was also a town notary, trusted and steady. If the will was to hold weight, her eyes needed to see it. Nora met them on the porch, sleeves rolled and chalk on her hands. Jed Mathers, I haven't seen you near a book in years. He smiled faintly. Never too late to learn. I brought something that needs reading more than I do. She looked over the paper with care, adjusting her spectacles and tracing her finger down the ink lines. Seals crude but authentic. This paper stock matches what the circuit lawyers used around 83 to 85. And this copper button, that's a homemade seal Tyler used when he filed his grazing claims. She glanced at Tommy. You remember me, don't you? From when your daddy used to bring you to the spring fair? Tommy nodded, eyes still wide. This is his will, all right, she said firmly. Clear as sunrise. Jed exhaled. Would you write an affidavit confirming that? Sign and seal it? Nora nodded. I'll do one better. I'll log it in my notary registry and make 3 copies. But they weren't the only ones interested in documents that day. That night, while Tommy slept curled on a cot beside the fire, Jed sat sharpening his knife in rhythm with the tick of the clock. He couldn't sleep. Something in his gut was off-kilter. Just before midnight, he heard it, glass cracking. Jed rose silently, stepping barefoot onto the porch. A shadow moved by the barn. Another slunk past the window. He darted to the side of the house, but by the time he reached the back, they were gone. Inside, Nora's schoolhouse had been broken into. The next morning, Jed rode into town with Nora to check the damage. Papers were scattered everywhere, ink pots overturned, and her notary seal gone. They were looking for our affidavit, she said quietly, or trying to make it look like we never filed it. Jed clenched his jaw. Then we better make sure we file it where they can't erase it. Nora glanced toward the courthouse. And we better do it quick. Back at the ranch, Jed tucked the original will into a tobacco tin and buried it beneath the corner fence post. He handed Tommy a pencil and said, Start writing down everything you remember. What your pa said, what that judge did. Words matter now. Tommy stared up at him. You think this'll really stop him? Jed looked out toward the horizon. It won't stop him, but it'll sure slow him down. The 4th of July in Cold Rock was the one day the town dressed up and pretended the world wasn't hard. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every awning. The general store sold lemon sarsaparilla for 2 cents a bottle. A fiddle tune echoed off the saloon walls as kids raced stick ponies down the dusty main road. Jed and Tommy walked the fairgrounds together, the boys' eyes wide at the games and booths. A moment of normal, Jed figured. One day to let the kid breathe. But even under the crack of fireworks and laughter, Jed's eyes stayed sharp. Judge Canfield stood on a wooden platform near the courthouse, arms raised in mock humility as the crowd clapped politely. Behind him were 2 strangers, both clean-shaven, wearing stiff jackets too fine for ranch hands. Folks of Cold Rock, Canfield boomed, it's time to bring law and order to the untamed edges. Idle land invites lawlessness. We must stand firm and cultivate progress. Jed's jaw twitched. He turned away, but not before noticing one of the men behind the judge was watching him too closely. "Come on," he said to Tommy. "Let's find the pony ride." Tommy trotted ahead toward a row of paint ponies tethered to a hitch. He hesitated, then asked, "Think I could try it?" "You ride better than half these fellas already. Go on." Jed paid the coin and helped the boy mount. Tommy gave a shaky nod to the handler and took a few loops around the dusty ring. Nora, handing out lemonade nearby, clapped when Tommy passed. "He's got balance," she said softly to Jed. "More than most men grown. Just needs space to remember who he is." But the peace didn't last. As they headed back toward the wagon, Jed spotted the same two strangers cutting through the crowd behind them. He pulled Tommy closer. "You see them men?" he whispered. Tommy nodded. "They were near the schoolhouse last night." Jed's hand dropped to the small of Tommy's back, guiding him quick and quiet toward the alley between the mercantile and the post office. They slipped out of sight, and Jed circled back toward the wagon alone. The back axle had been tampered with. The right wheel sat at a slant, the pin nearly sawed clean through. He crouched beside it, jaw tight. "Somebody wants us off balance." Footsteps crunched behind him. Amos. "Had a feeling they'd try something today," the old man said. "I saw two fellas creeping around your barn late last night. Thought they were just lost drunks. Now I ain't so sure." Jed stood, dusting off his hands. "You catch a good look?" "One was heavy set, wore a silver belt buckle with initials etched on it, J.C. Jed paused. "Canfield?" "Not the judge himself, but maybe someone who works under him." Back at the ranch, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Jed checked the barn floor. Sure enough, footprints trailed through the hay, too wide for Tommy's boots. In the corner, something glinted. He picked it up. A belt buckle, silver, scuffed at the edges. The initials, R.C., were carved into the center. Jed held it up to the lantern. "Rufus Canfield," he muttered. "Judge's cousin. Works courthouse security." He pocketed it. The message was clear now. Canfield wasn't just flexing courtroom power. He was reaching into barns, wagons, and schools. Quiet intimidation. Hard to trace. Harder to prove. That night, as Tommy slept under a patched quilt, Jed sat sharpening his knife beside the hearth. Nora poured 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside him. "You're not going to win this in a courtroom," she said. Jed nodded. "No, but I can hold the line until someone who can shows up." Nora looked at him, eyes steady. "You already are." The next morning, Jed gathered the wagon harness and loaded up the recovered will, the school affidavit, and the stolen buckle. "Where we going?" Tommy asked. Jed gave a half smile. "To file what they can't ignore, and make sure everyone sees us do it." The clerk at the Cold Rock courthouse squinted at the paperwork, then at Jed. "You're petitioning for guardianship?" he asked, tapping the edge of the desk. "On behalf of a minor not legally kin?" Jed nodded. "His name's Thomas Jennings. His father's will, carbon copy, is right there, signed and witnessed. One of the witnesses is dead, the other's Silas Trent. We're tracking him." The clerk glanced toward the hallway, then leaned in. "You sure you want to do this? Judge Canfield ain't fond of people questioning court orders." Jed held steady. "I'm not questioning. I'm challenging. Proper and legal." Behind him, Nora stood with her arms crossed, expression unreadable. Tommy clutched her hand, his eyes big but dry. The clerk sighed and reached for a file stamp. "All right then, I'll log the petition, but you best get that second witness, or the judge'll toss it." They filed the copy of the will, the affidavit from Nora, and the statement about the belt buckle. Doc Amos said he'd come forward if needed, though his bruised ribs still made walking slow. By dusk, the town seemed unusually quiet. That night, thunder cracked across the plains, a dry summer storm with no rain behind it. Jed tossed in his bunk, nerves stretched thin. Then came the shout. "Fire! Barn's lit!" Jed bolted outside barefoot, his rifle forgotten. Flames licked the sides of the barn like orange teeth, chewing at the rafters. He ran straight in, pulling open stall doors. "Hawk, where's the boy?" he yelled, eyes scanning the haze. A cough answered from the corner. Tommy had run in to rescue a small goat they'd taken in last week. Jed grabbed him, shielding the boy with his coat as they stumbled through the smoke. Outside, Nora grabbed Tommy and hugged him tight. Jed turned back, but it was too late. The feed was gone, the tack scorched, the rear wall collapsed inward. Dawn came heavy and gray, the air thick with char. Doc Amos arrived with his walking stick and a stiff grimace. "It was them," he said simply. "Saw two shapes riding off right after the blaze caught. One wore boots with a gold-plated heel." Jed's jaw clenched. Rufus Canfield again. He knelt in the ash and found what he was looking for. A boot print near the back gate, square heel worn to the right side. A small fleck of gold still clung to a blackened straw. He pocketed it. At noon, Jed rode into town again. The sheriff, skinny, twitchy-eyed, watched him from the steps of the jail. "Mathers," he called, "Judge Canfield's requested a meeting about your situation." Jed dismounted and looked the man square in the eye. "Tell the judge I filed my petition. I got the boy, the will, the school affidavit, and 2 broken barn doors saying someone's nervous." The sheriff smirked. "You ain't family." Jed's voice dropped, flat and firm. "Maybe not by blood, but I'm the one standing between that boy and a crooked land grab. That makes me something." Later that evening, Nora came rushing up the trail toward the cabin, waving a folder. "I found it," she gasped, breath short. "Silas Trent. He subbed at my school 2 winters ago. I still have the rosters. His signature's there, same as the will." Jed took the folder, flipping through carefully. Silas's signature looped at the bottom of the page beside Nora's own notes. "That enough?" Nora asked. Jed nodded slowly. "It has to be." The fire might have shaken the boy, but Tommy never once asked to leave. That night, as Jed patched the fence line, Tommy brought him a dented canteen and sat beside him. "Pa always said being brave don't mean you ain't scared," he said quietly. Jed smiled, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Then you're braver than most men I know." The wind picked up, carrying dust and soot into the twilight. "Tomorrow," Jed said, "we give the judge one more reason to regret ever riding past that fence line." Jed didn't hear the sheriff until the iron cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. He'd just stepped off the boardwalk outside the feed store, fresh from showing the town clerk Nora's school roster with Silas Trent's signature, when Sheriff Haynes came striding up with 2 deputies. "Jed Mathers?" "You're under arrest," the sheriff said, voice too loud for the quiet afternoon. "Interfering in an active court proceeding and attempting to influence a minor." Jed didn't struggle, just looked him dead in the eye. "You ever get tired taking orders from a man with dirtier hands than your jail floor?" The sheriff didn't answer, just jerked the chain and marched him toward the courthouse, loud and public like he wanted every townsperson to see it. Inside the cell, the door clanged shut. Jed settled onto the cot and listened to the quiet tick of the hallway clock. Outside, Tommy stood just past the barred window, clutching a piece of wood with shaky fingers. He'd scrawled something in black ink on the face of it. Jed leaned close. "He's my pa." The boy didn't say a word, just held it up until his arms trembled, then slowly lowered it and walked back toward Nora's wagon. Jed exhaled, slow and even. "Cute kid," came a voice from the neighboring cell, gravelly, worn. "You ain't his real father, though, are you?" Jed turned. A broad-shouldered man sat in the corner, boots kicked out, hat resting low. "Name's Eli Pearson," he said. "Used to wear a badge before Canfield got me pushed out. Saw too much, asked too many questions." Jed nodded once. "What are you in for?" "Public drunkenness. Truth is, I was following a lead on Canfield's property deeds. You wouldn't believe how many unclaimed parcels suddenly end up under his cousin's name. Got records. Some I copied before they ran me off." Jed leaned forward. "You still got them?" Eli tilted his head. "Maybe. Depends who's asking." "I'm not asking for me," Jed said. "I'm asking for that boy." That changed Eli's tone. "He the Jennings kid? I remember his pa. Honest man. I was there when Canfield tried to strong-arm him into selling early last year. He refused. Said his son would inherit what was his." Jed's hands curled around the bars. Then maybe there's still a way. Later that night, when the hallway dimmed and only one deputy snored in the front office, a soft knock tapped at the barred window. "Jed?" came Nora's whisper. "Tommy and I brought something. Didn't want to leave it behind." He stepped over and saw her holding a hollowed-out Bible, the kind church kids used to stash gum wrappers. Inside, tucked snug in the carved pages, lay the school roster, complete with Silas Trent's signature, and the original petition forms stamped by the courthouse. "They won't check this," she said, too busy patting each other's backs. Jed looked past her to Tommy, who stood holding his worn satchel like it was a shield. The boy didn't say much, but his eyes never left Jed's. "I'll be out soon," Jed told him. "You better be," Tommy muttered. "Nora's cooking is terrible." Jed laughed, short and tired, but real. Once they were gone, Eli handed over a worn envelope. "That logbook I told you about," he said. "Old registry of disputed deeds. I stashed this in a feed sack before I was booted. Ain't much, but there's enough to raise eyebrows." Inside were pages dated months apart, all showing Canfield's signature on petitions to hold properties in temporary trust, always following a death or disappearance. Widow here, orphan there. Jed stared down at the documents, heart hammering. "This is it." Eli leaned back. "Tomorrow you'll need more than grit. You'll need the whole town listening." Jed nodded. "Then let's give 'em something they won't forget." The air inside the Dust Creek courthouse felt thick, like heat trapped under a skillet lid. Folks filled every bench, some standing along the walls, boots scuffing pine floors as they shifted from foot to foot. It wasn't every day Judge Canfield called a special hearing on a Monday morning, and certainly not one this loaded. Jed sat at the defendant's table, fresh out of jail, with a bruise under one eye and a calm he'd earned through years of drought, busted fence posts, and trail dust. Beside him sat Nora, lips tight, her notary seal now recovered and gleaming on the table. Across the aisle, Judge Canfield stood like he owned the room. "This proceeding," he began, voice syrupy, "is to address fraudulent interference in a pending guardianship case. A certain party has inserted themselves without legal standing and submitted documents of dubious origin." Jed didn't blink. He waited. Canfield gestured broadly. "This man," he pointed straight at Jed, "was arrested for trespassing, forgery, and misleading a minor. He claims to speak for the deceased Jennings estate. But let me be clear, no certified will was ever filed, and the boy, while pitiable, is not protected by guesswork and sentiment." That's when Jed stood. "Your Honor," he said, voice low and even, "may I speak?" Canfield hesitated, then smirked. "By all means, Mr. Mathers. Let's hear your fiction." Jed turned to face the crowd. "Tommy Jennings ain't just some orphan tossed on a wind. His pa left behind a will. I found it in the old mine shack, fireproof pouch, sealed, witnessed by 2 men. One of them passed, the other, Silas Trent, is confirmed on record from Miss Nora's school rosters." He handed the deed and the carbon will to the bailiff, who passed them to Canfield. "And here," Jed said, lifting a worn page, "is the school register. Nora signed off on the handwriting. And this," he held up another sheet, "is an affidavit from Eli Pearson, former sheriff, showing a pattern in how these disputed lands somehow all end up with connections to this very courthouse." Canfield's face tightened. "Are you accusing this court of conspiracy?" he growled. Jed didn't flinch. "I'm asking this court to look at the facts. A boy was nearly stripped of what his father left him. Evidence has gone missing, witnesses attacked, and that boy, he stood outside a jail cell for hours, holding a sign that said I was his pa." Canfield waved him off. "This is anecdotal at best. No governing body has—" Jed cut him off, calm but firm. "Actually, Your Honor, I sent a sealed letter, dated and signed, to the territorial governor 3 weeks ago. Contained all these documents and more. Requested independent oversight." A hush swept the room. Canfield blinked. Just then, the courthouse doors creaked open. A rider in a long coat stepped in, dust still clinging to his sleeves. "Name's Deputy Marshal Lang," the man announced. "By order of Governor Halpern, Judge Canfield is hereby placed under immediate inquiry. All rulings and land seizures over the past 2 years are to be audited, starting today." Gasps rang out like gunshots. Canfield staggered back a step. "This is outrageous!" The marshal raised a hand. "I suggest you sit, sir. The people of Dust Creek deserve their day." Jed turned as Tommy stepped up beside him, face flushed but steady. He held out his compass. "I brought this," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "It belonged to Pa. He carved his initials in it." The marshal took it, examined the faded letters, same as those on the will. The marshal nodded. "I believe that closes the loop." Jed knelt beside Tommy, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Whatever happens next, you ain't standing alone." Tommy looked up, eyes steady. "Good. I don't aim to." The courthouse emptied slower than it had filled. Folks didn't rush. They lingered. Some whispered, others just stood with arms crossed, watching Judge Canfield sit pale and stone still behind his bench, like a statue left out too long in the rain. Outside, the wind stirred Dust Creek's red dirt into slow spirals. Nora wiped her palms on her skirt and leaned close to Jed and Tommy. "He didn't even try to deny it," she whispered. "Not one word." Jed nodded. Sometimes a man don't need to speak when the truth finally walks in the room. Deputy Marshal Lang stood firm at the front, now flanked by 2 newly appointed guards. "Per the governor's order," he read aloud, "all of Judge Canfield's land rulings, including guardianship transfers and tax foreclosures, will be frozen pending investigation. Any active seizures are revoked until further notice." He paused, then added, "including the Jennings estate." A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Tommy looked up at Jed, eyes wide. "So it's ours again?" he asked. Jed smiled, laying a hand on the boy's shoulder. "That land's yours, son. Always was." Marshal Lang cleared his throat. "Sheriff Boone has also stepped down. Effective immediately, Elias Pearson will resume the position until the next election." There was a murmur, mostly approving, followed by a few quiet nods. Eli Pearson stepped forward, his silver-streaked hair catching the light. "I never wanted that badge back," he said, voice gravelly. "But I reckon sometimes duty doesn't care what you want." He turned to Jed. "I owe you." Jed tipped his hat. "Wasn't about owing, just about doing what's right." "Still," Pearson said, cracking a smile, "you ever think about pinning on a badge? I'd sleep easier knowing you had it." Tommy tugged Jed's sleeve. "Would that mean you're the law?" Jed chuckled. "Just means I'd get blamed when the coffee's cold at the jailhouse." Across the room, Judge Canfield was being led quietly through the side door. No manacles yet, just shame on his shoulders. A woman in a bonnet spit in the dirt near his feet. No one stopped her. Doc Amos hobbled up, cane tapping wood floor. "Didn't think I'd live to see the day," he said, thumbing his brim. "The mighty Canfield brought down by a boy with a compass and a cowboy who don't talk much." Nora gave a half smile. "And a schoolmarm with good ink habits." Amos winked. "Don't forget that hollowed-out Bible. Thing was more useful than Sunday service." Laughter rolled soft and surprised from a few townsfolk. It wasn't joy just yet, but it was close. Back outside, the sun hung low but warm over the rooftops of Dust Creek. Jed walked beside Tommy down Main Street. Men tipped their hats. Women nodded. Even the shopkeeper, who used to ignore them, offered a bag of hard candy on the house. Tommy fidgeted with his compass, then looked up. "You still gonna ride off?" Jed slowed. "You want me?" Tommy stopped. "I don't got anyone else, but I don't want to make you stay if you don't want to." Jed crouched, meeting the boy's gaze. "Truth is, I came out here for quiet. No plans, no family, just the sky and some fence lines." Tommy nodded, looking down. "But," Jed added, "sometimes plans don't matter much when a good reason comes along." The boy squinted. "What kind of reason?" Jed stood, ruffling his hair. "You, Tommy, you're the kind of reason that makes a man stick around." Tommy grinned. "So, I can still call you Pa, right?" Jed's voice caught for just a breath. Then he said, quiet but sure, "Yeah, son, You sure can. Behind them, the courthouse bell rang. This time, it didn't sound like judgment. It sounded like a beginning. The next morning, the sky over Dust Creek stretched wide and clean, like the land itself had taken a long breath after years of holding it in. Jed Mathers stood beside Tommy in the soft light, staring at the gate to what was once Jennings' ranch, and now, rightfully, the boys' land. Except Jed no longer thought of it like that. It wasn't just Tommy's anymore. It was theirs. Tommy held a hammer awkwardly, his brow wrinkled as he lined up the last nail on a new sign. The fresh wood plank bore letters carved in Amos's careful hand, Mathers and Son. Not fancy, not polished, but sturdy, honest. You think it's crooked? Tommy asked, biting his lip. Jed stepped back a few paces, tilting his head. Little to the left, he said, but sometimes that's how the best things start. They both laughed, and Jed handed the boy a branding iron. The new brand was simple, a stylized M over a compass. The compass was Tommy's idea, of course. Said it reminded him how even when things got lost, they could still be found again. Jed thought that was mighty wise for a 10-year-old. Tommy lifted the iron from the fire with a steady grip. Jed steadied the calf, murmuring low to calm it. With a hiss and puff of smoke, the mark was set. That's our first calf, Tommy said, eyes wide. We did it. Jed grinned. Yep, start of a herd if we do it right. They turned as Nora approached from the schoolhouse, holding a small bundle wrapped in linen. Thought you might want this back, she said, handing over the compass. Tommy left it on my desk yesterday. Tommy blushed. Didn't mean to. Just forgot. Jed took it, brushing his thumb over the worn surface. He's got a lot on his mind lately, he said with a smile. Nora looked around. Place is coming back to life. I passed by the north field, saw green shoots already poking through. Jed nodded. Soil was tired, but it ain't dead. Just needed a little help. Doc Amos hobbled over, leaning on his cane. Same goes for people, he muttered. This town needed a little truth to wake it up. Jed offered him a hand up onto the porch step. Well, you helped plant a fair bit of it, Doc. Amos snorted. I just told the truth when nobody else remembered it. The rest was you two. They all stood for a quiet moment, watching as the wind carried dust and sunlight across the hills. A few riders passed on the road. One of them tipped his hat at Jed, who nodded back without a word. Folks used to avoid this ranch, Nora said softly. Now they slow down when they pass. Respect's funny that way, Jed replied. Don't come when you chase it. Comes when you stand still long enough to earn it. Later, as the sun began to dip low, Jed lit the lamp inside the cabin and hung Tommy's compass above the fireplace. The boy watched him carefully. You sure it's okay up there? Tommy asked. It's the only thing I had from my pa. Jed looked at him, voice steady. It's still from your pa. That part hasn't changed. But now it means something more. Tommy nodded, and they sat together at the rough-hewn table, supper steaming between them. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't quiet because of loss. It was quiet because of peace. As the last light faded, Jed looked across the table and said, We got work ahead. Fixing fences, tending calves, learning the land. Tommy grinned. And I ain't scared of none of it. Jed raised his cup. To Mathers and Son. The boy lifted his too. To us. If you believe being a father ain't always about blood, but about showing up when it counts, subscribe and ride with us, partner.